Good morning, everybody. This is Bill Cloud, and welcome to On This Day. Today is the first day of the month called Adar. Jewish tradition believes that it was on this day that the ninth plague, that is the plague of darkness, descended upon Egypt. And that's recorded for us in Exodus chapter 10, beginning in verse 21. So let's read. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand toward heaven, that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, darkness which may even be felt." So Moses stretched out his hand toward heaven, and there was thick darkness in all the land of Egypt 3 days. They did not see one another, nor did anyone rise from his place for 3 days. But all of the children of Israel had light in their dwellings. Now there are 2 primary points that I want to make here. And the first one is that this is not an ordinary darkness, but it's described as being thick darkness, one that might be felt. The root word that's translated thick here actually insinuates something that prevents light from being able to permeate it. It's also a word that's translated many times as gloomy. So it seems that this was more than just the absence of light. In fact, the Jewish commentator Maimonides, who's also known as the Rambam, wrote that it was a fog-like condition that had the ability to extinguish all light. An apocryphal book called The Wisdom of Solomon records this: "No force of fire prevailed to give them light, neither were the bright flames of the stars strong enough to illumine that glooming night." So in other words, it was so intense that the Egyptians couldn't keep track of day or night. They couldn't go anywhere. They couldn't see anyone. Again, this darkness seems to be more than just the absence of light. And with that in mind, it should be noted that on many occasions in the Bible, God Himself is associated with darkness. In Psalm 18, He makes darkness His secret place, and He surrounds Himself with a canopy of dark clouds. And here's why that's of interest to us. As Israel prepared to cross the Red Sea, the pillar of fire stood between them and the Egyptians. To the Egyptians, it was a cloud of darkness, but to the Hebrews, it provided light, and that brings us to our second point. In the midst of the darkness that enveloped Egypt, God's people were given light, demonstrating that God often uses the darkness to accentuate the light. Perhaps this is hinting that the darkness that fell upon Egypt was somehow associated with the Creator. In other words, perhaps He came into Egypt, and while His presence was darkness to His enemies, it was light to His people. And I think this is important to consider because in the future, the world is going to be thrown into darkness, oftentimes described as gloominess. The prophet Joel said this: "Blow the trumpet in Zion and sound an alarm in my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of the Lord is coming. For it is at hand, a day of darkness and gloominess, a day of clouds and thick darkness." We believe that day is fast approaching, and as God's people, we need to prepare ourselves for this visitation. It's our mission to be the light in the midst of darkness, and so we must embrace the fact that for light to be noticed, there must also be darkness. Because He allows the darkness, we shouldn't rely upon our own merits and abilities, but we should trust in His mercy, His forgiveness, as we seek to fulfill the mandate to be that light. I believe David alluded to this when he said this: "You prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies." Though we may find ourselves surrounded by spiritual darkness and wickedness, the Creator will care for and provide for His people because He controls every aspect of our lives if we submit to His will. As trying as the times may be, it doesn't have to be a bad thing. Though judgment may come, it might be judgment and punishment for the guilty, but for the righteous, it can be vindication. Though it will expose the weakness of institutions, industries, and even individuals, simultaneously, it can vindicate others. It can expose the strength in others. And that fact brings us to this very important point. The foundation that we stand upon doesn't need to be our righteousness or our good works. It must be in whom we have placed our trust, that is the Messiah. Though darkness is descending upon us, we can take comfort in the fact that the Creator is the one who controls that darkness. And still, He expects you and me to be the light. Thanks for joining me today, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Shalom.